The time has come for you, my friend, to build an outdoor rink. This winter, you could have one of the coolest backyards in your city. Put up some boards, lay down a tarp, fill it with water, and let the magic happen. So are you in? If you've never built a rink before, you might be intimidated at the prospect. Don't be. It's not rocket science. I can do it. Do you know what happens to water when the temperature dips below freezing? It freezes. There's your concept. Water is your friend. If you have a yard that's pretty level and cold winter weather, you can be one of those cool ODR parents that all the kids are raving about. In this video, you will watch me build a rink, and I will walk you through what you need to know to build that sweet, sweet ODR. So what supplies are you going to need? You're going to need a white tarp. This is basically going to be like a giant pool liner that will hold the water in place until it freezes. A dark color will attract the sun and your ice will get soft in the sunlight. Stick to white. Plywood. You will need plywood boards to hold everything in place. Wooden stakes to drive into the ground to support the boards. A sledgehammer to pound in the stakes. Screwdriver and screws. A snow shovel, a garden hose, and a water supply. And some optional supplies that might be nice to have include clamps to hold the liner in place while you fill it with water, an ice flutter that attaches to your garden hose, a hockey net, netting to stop stray pucks, lights if you want to skate at night, and if your rink is relatively large, you may wish to have a snowblower as well. Check out the video's description below for some links for some of these products which I have used or highly recommend. And since I'm Canadian, I have also included a great Canadian rink store, so check that out if you're from the Great White North. So how do we do this? First, we're going to measure out the size of our rink with stakes and string. Use a chalk line if you have one, or just spray paint the grass like I did. This will help you keep your boards relatively straight. Start installing your boards in one corner and work your way around. Drive your stakes deep into the soil and screw the boards into the stakes. Keep in mind that water is heavy, so it's better to overbrace than have your boards collapse or bow severely from the pressure of the water. The three low sides of my rink, I use 1/2-inch plywood. Don't go thinner than this. 1/2-inch plywood will warp, but it is strong enough. My tall end boards are 5/8 of an inch thick and they are definitely stronger. I would recommend not making any of your boards lower than 12 inches high, because once you fill the rink with water, you're going to want a good 2 to 3 inches minimum of water where your ice is the thinnest. You might be surprised to find that your yard isn't as level as you thought, and like me, you might have one corner that's only a few inches thick and another place where it's closer to 10 inches thick. Give yourself some wiggle room. Plus, the taller your boards are, the better it will be for keeping pucks in, and it will take longer before the snowbanks have overflowed the height of your boards. I personally think probably around 20 inches of height on the boards would be ideal, but just keep in mind that the taller they get, the further up you will have to lift your snow shovel when you are scraping. So there are some pros and cons to higher versus lower boards. And you definitely don't have to have big high boards on the end like I do. Now, let's talk about rink size. First of all, keep in mind that your rink is going to feel a lot smaller once you are zipping around it on skates than it did when you were envisioning it in the summer wearing flip-flops and shorts. My rink is 26 feet by 44 feet. Stick around until the end of the video for some more footage of us skating on it. It's basically maxed out the size of my town backyard. If I could go bigger, I definitely would like that. Sure, the rink is for my kids, but it's for me too. I love hockey. I'm just a fledgling men's league player in his mid-30s, but I find the rink a little tight. You only have a few strides to get from end to end, but still, it is awesome. It is so much fun. It's a great size for one-on-one with my son, and I have a feeling the ODR is here to stay until my youngest son is well into his teens. So if you know you will have more advanced, older hockey players on the ice, I would definitely advise going big. Like I said, what might feel big when you stand there in the summer feels much smaller once you are zipping around on skates. Trust me. The trade-off for a bigger size is going to be the cost of your tarp, more wood required for the boards, and of course a bigger time commitment when it comes to shoveling and a little more time to flood. But if you have no idea if your kids are going to enjoy skating, it's fine to start with a very simple, very small rink, but overall, bigger is better. Just be reasonable. Don't worry about comparing your rink size to your neighbors or to my rink. A tiny rink is still a lot better than no rink. And if a big rink just feels overwhelming, start small. You can go bigger down the road if your space allows it. Once your boards are set up, you're going to sit tight and ideally wait for the forecast to predict several days of weather close to 10 degrees below freezing. Don't set up your tarp until you're ready to fill it with water, or you risk it getting damaged and filled with leaves, twigs, and dead squirrels. You don't want these things in your ice, I'm guessing. Don't start filling the tarp with water until it can start freezing right away. You want to set up the tarp, fill it, and have it start freezing immediately. The colder the weather, the faster your rink will freeze. Even with cold weather, expect it to take several days to freeze solid. Make sure the area is clear of all twigs and toys before you lay down your tarp. You can see that I gave my yard a quick rake just to be safe. Your tarp should be a minimum of 12 inches longer than your rink size in each direction. So, if your rink is 15 feet by 25 feet, you will need a tarp that is at least 17 by 27. If your rink is big, you might need a hand to roll out the tarp. Get it as flat as you can, and then you can keep stretching out the wrinkles as the tarp begins to fill with water. Use clamps or screws through the grommets to hold your tarp in place. Be sure to leave lots of slack if using screws so that the tarp has room to fill in any depressions in your yard. For a reference, using one hose, my 26 by 44 foot rink took around 12 hours to fill. Once the water is deep enough to cover a good 2 to 3 inches minimum over the entire rink, you can stop the water and remove the hose. I would leave the clamps on the tarp until the water has frozen. Once the water is frozen, you are ready to skate. It's that easy. One extra step I take is that I cover the exposed tarp with a dasher board. I just fold down the extra tarp behind strips of wood and put a couple screws in the boards above the tarp. Don't put these screws through the tarp if you want to reuse the tarp next season, so be careful. And now for a few other tips. Rinks aren't overly hard to make, but they will take some time throughout the entire skating season. You will need to shovel the rink after snow falls and before flooding the ice. The milder the weather and the heavier and more advanced the skaters, the faster your rink will get chewed up. Young kids learning to skate will not chew up the ice much at all since their skates aren't going to be digging hard into the ice. At the beginning of the season, while the weather was mild, I would flood the ice every evening after we used it. Later in the winter, as the weather got colder, the flooding became less frequent. It's somewhat a matter of preference. If you're playing hockey, there's nothing like playing on ice that's slippery as glass after a flood. If you are just doing skating, a bit of snow on the ice isn't likely to bother you as much, and you can probably getting away with flooding less frequently. Another tip about flooding: try not to flood while it's snowing or if it will snow before the flood has frozen. It could make your ice quite bumpy. For flooding, some people love flooding with hot water. You don't need hot water to flood. Cold is fine. It's all I've ever used on my rink, and my ice has been amazing. I can see how hot water would have some benefits, such as melting the snow buildup as you flood, but it's not necessary. Cold is just fine. Another tip: don't let snow sit on your rink long when the weather is mild. You could have a disaster if it starts to melt and then freezes again. Lawn nerds, you might be worried about what having a tarp over your grass all winter will do to your lawn. Basically, nothing. My lawn pops back to life in the spring the same as my other grass. Speaking of tarps, how long will a tarp last? Some rink makers like to use a new tarp every year just so that they don't have to worry about the awful surprise of running their water all night and discovering that all the water is escaping out of a hole. Personally, I want to make this tarp last as long as I can. Tarps are expensive. I am on my second year with this tarp, and I am planning on using it again next season. Barring a hole, who knows? Maybe I will get 10 years out of it if I'm careful. If you are a decent hockey player planning on doing shooting practice on your rink, be aware that pucks shot off a crossbar can go really high. Pucks off of a post can go really wide. Even with netting, you are likely to have pucks flying out of the rink. Last season, one of my shots cracked the siding on my house. Posts and crossbars are not your friend. Be careful if there are houses nearby. Go high with the netting. My netting reaches about 10 feet tall, and lots of pucks go over the top. Go tall, or have a lot of space. To attach the netting, I use zip ties. My brother also has a rink and he used screws with washers, which sounds like a better idea to me. Don't stretch the netting very tight or the pucks will come flying out of there at a hazardous speed, and that ain't cool. Keep some slack. If you have any other questions that I didn't address in this video, ask me in the comments below and I will try to give you a good answer. I hope you enjoyed the video. Now go outside and make that rink. You are one cool parent. Or brother or sister. Yeah. And if you're interested, don't forget to check out my video on the playset that you saw in the background of this video. There's also plans available you can purchase so that you can build it yourself.